Hello, everyone. Welcome to 90 Day Truth Files. Real stories, real truth. Subscribe now. Jenny had trusted Sumit with her heart, her life, and her future. She left her home, her family, and her comfort zone to be with him in India, believing love would conquer all. But what she did not know was that Sumit had been hiding a devastating secret. Behind closed doors and whispered phone calls, he was living a double life. One where Jenny was the dream, and another where a second wife existed in silence. For months, Jenny sensed something was wrong. His late nights, his nervous glances, his sudden trips, all pointed to a truth he refused to admit. Then one night, a stranger knocked at the door, carrying papers, photos, and a truth that shattered everything. The woman claimed she was legally married to Sumit, that their families had arranged the marriage, that Jenny was never meant to stay. Jenny's world collapsed in seconds. Her heart raced, her mind froze, and her trust turned into betrayal. Sumit tried to deny it, then tried to justify it, then tried to beg, but the damage was already done. Jenny realized she had been living inside a lie, surrounded by promises that were never real. The truth spread fast. Neighbors whispered, relatives stared, and the pressure became unbearable. Jenny felt unsafe, emotionally broken, and trapped in a foreign land with no support system left. Her phone filled with messages from fans warning her to leave, urging her to protect herself. And one night, with nothing but a suitcase and shattered dreams, Jenny booked a flight back to America. She left without a goodbye, without closure, without answers, only pain, only questions, only heartbreak. The media exploded. Headlines screamed betrayal, deception, and scandal. Fans demanded answers, and Sumit finally confessed to the secret marriage, admitting he had been pressured by his family and trapped in a life he did not choose. But his confession came too late. Jenny had already escaped, already chosen survival over suffering, already reclaimed her freedom. Her journey back to America was not just a flight. It was a rebirth, a decision to live again, to breathe again, to love herself again. And as she landed, the world watched, knowing this was not the end of her story, but the beginning of a new chapter built on strength, truth, and independence. She remembered the early days when everything felt magical, when every message felt like destiny and every call felt like home. She remembered how he promised forever, how he swore there were no secrets, how he said their love was stronger than tradition, culture, and fear. But behind every promise he carried silence, behind every silence he carried guilt, and behind every guilt he carried another life he refused to face. Late nights became routine, excuses became normal, distance became invisible, and love became confusing. Jenny tried to communicate, to understand, to forgive, but she was fighting a battle she did not know existed. Then one afternoon her instincts pushed her to follow him, not out of jealousy, but out of survival. She watched him enter a house she had never seen before. Moments later, a woman appeared at the door, holding his hand, laughing, living a life Jenny believed was hers. Her heart shattered, her knees weakened, and her world stopped spinning. She confronted him that night, demanding the truth, and this time there was nowhere left to hide. Sumit broke down and confessed, admitting that he had been secretly married through family pressure, admitting that he never found the courage to tell her, admitting that he loved her but was trapped in another life. The betrayal cut deeper than any argument, deeper than any distance, deeper than any fear. Jenny realized that love without honesty is not love at all. It is a cage, and she refused to remain trapped. The next morning she packed her bags, deleted photos, blocked numbers, and prepared to leave. Sumit begged, cried, promised change. But Jenny had already lost trust, already lost hope, already lost the future she imagined. She boarded her flight alone, her eyes filled with tears, but her heart filled with clarity. She was not running away. She was running toward herself, toward safety, toward truth. And as the news broke, fans around the world reacted with shock, anger, and heartbreak. Many felt betrayed alongside Jenny. Others demanded accountability from Sumit, and the scandal grew bigger by the hour. Interviews, leaks, and rumors flooded the internet, revealing details of the secret marriage, the family involvement, and the emotional damage left behind. But Jenny remained silent, choosing peace over chaos, healing over revenge, and freedom over deception. Her escape was not weakness. It was power, it was survival, it was self-respect, and the world watched as she turned pain into strength and heartbreak into a new beginning. She gave everything to love. She crossed oceans, defied age gaps, ignored criticism, and believed in the power of connection. Sumit was her anchor, her hope, her future, or so she thought. But the truth was far darker than she imagined. Behind every smile he carried fear. Behind every promise he carried regret. And behind every plan he carried a secret. The secret was not just a mistake. It was a second marriage, a life he never told Jenny about, a family decision he never fought, and a betrayal he never confessed. Jenny sensed the distance growing, the silence deepening, and the love fading. She tried to save what she believed was real. But reality had already moved in another direction. Then one day the truth arrived without warning, like a storm that destroys everything in its path. Documents, messages, and witnesses confirmed the unthinkable. Sumit was legally married to another woman, living a double life, and using Jenny as an escape from reality. Jenny felt numb, her body shook, her heart broke, and her soul collapsed. The man she loved was no longer real. The future she dreamed of no longer existed, and the life she built in India no longer felt safe. She confronted him, and this time there were no lies left, only tears, only regret, only fear. Sumit admitted everything, blaming tradition, family pressure, and his own weakness, but none of that could repair the damage. Jenny realized she had sacrificed too much for someone who sacrificed nothing for her, and in that moment, she chose herself. She packed her memories, her pain, and her strength, and left India behind. Her escape to America was not just physical, it was emotional, mental, and spiritual. She was escaping lies, manipulation, and heartbreak, and returning to truth, dignity, and self-worth. The world reacted with shock, sympathy, and outrage. But Jenny remained focused on healing, rebuilding, and rediscovering who she was before betrayal. Her story became a lesson. Love without honesty is destruction. Trust without truth is illusion. And staying in pain is not loyalty. It is self-betrayal. Jenny did not lose. She survived. She did not fail. She awakened, and she did not escape. She rose, she confronted him. And this time there were no lies left, only tears, only regret, only fear. Sumit admitted everything, blaming tradition, family pressure, and his own weakness, but none of that could repair the damage. Jenny realized she had sacrificed too much for someone who sacrificed nothing for her, and in that moment, she chose herself. She packed her memories, her pain, and her strength, and left India behind, her escape too. America was not just physical, it was emotional, mental, and spiritual. She was escaping lies, manipulation, and heartbreak, and returning to truth, dignity, and self-worth. The world reacted with shock, sympathy, and outrage. But Jenny remained focused on healing, rebuilding, and rediscovering who she was before betrayal. Her story became a lesson. Love without honesty is destruction. Trust without truth is illusion. And staying in pain is not loyalty. It is self-betrayal. Jenny did not lose. She survived. She did not fail. She awakened, and she did not escape. She rose. And as days passed in America, Jenny began to rebuild her life piece by piece, moment by moment, breath by breath. Mornings felt quiet but safe. Nights felt lonely but peaceful. And for the first time in months, she slept without fear, without suspicion, without waiting for a lie to be uncovered. She started walking again, eating again, laughing again, slowly reminding herself that she still existed beyond heartbreak. Friends reached out. Family welcomed her back, and strangers online sent messages of support, encouragement, and solidarity, reminding her that she was not alone, that her pain was seen, and that her strength was admired. Jenny read every message, not for validation, but for healing, because each word reminded her that love still existed in the world, just not in the place she had searched for it. She began therapy, not because she was broken, but because she wanted to understand herself, her patterns, her choices, and her boundaries, she wanted to know why she had stayed, why she had ignored red flags, why she had sacrificed herself for someone who was not ready to sacrifice anything in return. And through reflection, she learned that love without boundaries becomes self-abandonment, that empathy without limits becomes self-destruction, and that hope without truth becomes illusion. She learned that loving someone does not mean losing yourself, and that loyalty does not mean tolerating betrayal. She learned that walking away is sometimes the bravest form of love, not love for another, but love for oneself. And as she healed, her story transformed from tragedy into testimony, from pain into power, from heartbreak into wisdom. People began to see her not as a victim, but as a survivor, not as a woman who lost love, but as a woman who found herself. Interviews followed, but she spoke carefully, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with honesty. She did not destroy Sumit publicly. She did not insult his family. She did not seek revenge. Instead, she spoke about boundaries, respect, honesty, and emotional safety. She said that love should feel safe, not confusing, stable, not chaotic, supportive, not manipulative, and that when love becomes a source of fear, doubt, or self-loss, it is no longer love. It is control. She shared how betrayal changes the body, how trust breaks the nervous system, how lies make you doubt your own reality, and how healing requires both time and compassion. Compassion for yourself, not just for the one who hurt you. And as her voice grew stronger, her influence grew wider. People around the world resonated with her experience. Women and men alike wrote to her, sharing their own stories of deception, manipulation, and emotional entrapment, thanking her for showing that leaving is not failure. Leaving is survival. Leaving is self-respect. Leaving is courage. Jenny read those messages and cried, not from pain, but from connection, because she realized that her story was no longer just hers. It had become a mirror for many, a reminder that love should never cost your peace, your dignity, or your identity. And as time moved forward, her memories of India began to soften, not disappear, but lose their sharpness. The streets no longer haunted her dreams. The voices no longer echoed in her mind, and the moments that once felt like nightmares slowly transformed into lessons. She remembered the good moments too, the laughter, the shared meals, the conversations, the hope, and she allowed herself to honor them without denying the truth. She learned that you can acknowledge love without romanticizing betrayal, that you can appreciate moments without excusing harm, and that you can release someone without erasing the part of yourself that once loved them. And in doing so, she found balance, she found peace, she found clarity, and as months passed, she began to imagine a future again, not with fear, not with doubt, but with possibility. She imagined a life built on honesty, mutual respect, emotional safety, and shared accountability. She imagined a partner who chooses her publicly, privately, and consistently, not one who hides her in shadows or uses her as an escape. She imagined a relationship where communication is clear, boundaries are respected, and love feels calm, not chaotic. And even if that future partner never came, she realized she was enough on her own. She realized her worth was not defined by a relationship, not by marriage, not by sacrifice, but by her character, her resilience, and her heart. And that realization gave her a freedom she had never known before. She began traveling again, not to escape pain, but to celebrate life. She explored new places, met new people, tried new foods, and allowed herself to experience joy without guilt, without fear, without apology. She reconnected with hobbies she had abandoned, rediscovered passions she had forgotten, and reclaimed parts of herself that had been lost in compromise. She began writing, journaling, speaking, and sharing, turning her pain into purpose and her purpose into impact. People listened, not because her story was dramatic, but because it was real, honest, and human. And through that honesty, she created connection. Through that connection, she created healing. And through that healing, she created growth. And while Sumit remained in India, facing the consequences of his choices, facing family pressure, public scrutiny, and personal regret, Jenny did not look back, not out of hatred, but out of self-respect. She did not wait for an apology, because closure does not come from another person. It comes from understanding, acceptance, and release. She did not wait for justice, because justice is not always punishment. Sometimes justice is freedom. Sometimes justice is peace. Sometimes justice is walking away and never returning. And she chose peace. She chose freedom. She chose herself. And as years passed, her story continued to evolve. Not as a scandal, not as gossip, but as a narrative of resilience, self-worth, and transformation. People no longer asked about betrayal. They asked about healing, growth, and empowerment. They asked how she found the strength to leave, how she rebuilt her life, how she learned to trust again. And she answered honestly. She said it was not easy, it was not quick, and it was not perfect, but it was possible. She said healing is not linear. Some days feel strong, others feel fragile. Some memories hurt, others fade. But every day you choose yourself. You move forward, and forward is where life lives. She said you cannot change the past, but you can choose your future. And that choice begins the moment you stop accepting what hurts you and start choosing what honors you. And through those words, she inspired countless others to examine their relationships, their boundaries, their self-worth, and their courage. She became a symbol not of heartbreak, but of hope. Not of betrayal, but of bravery, not of loss, but of liberation. And even when her story faded from headlines, it remained alive in hearts, minds, and conversations because it spoke to something universitier. Her journey, she did not feel regret. She felt gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons, gratitude for the growth, gratitude for the strength she discovered within herself, and gratitude for the life she rebuilt with intention, dignity, and self-love. She no longer defined herself by what she lost, but by what she gained: clarity, confidence, courage, and peace. And that peace became her home. More than any country, more than any relationship, more than any promise, peace became her true destination. And she lived her life not running from pain, but walking toward truth, not escaping heartbreak, but embracing healing, not fearing love, but choosing love wisely. And through that choice, she created a future rooted not in illusion, but in authenticity, not in sacrifice, but in balance, not in silence, but in truth. And that truth carried her forward into a life that finally felt like her own. And that truth carried her forward into a life that finally felt like her own. She woke each morning with a sense of calm she had never known before. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was honest. She no longer woke with anxiety, suspicion, or emotional weight. Instead, she woke with clarity, intention, and self-respect. She rebuilt her daily routines, created healthy boundaries, and learned how to listen to her intuition instead of silencing it. She learned that peace is not found in people. It is built within, and once built, no one else has the power to destroy it. She began reconnecting with old friends she had lost touch with during her relationship. Friends who welcomed her back without judgment, without questions, without expectations. Friends who reminded her who she was before compromise, before self-abandonment, before emotional exhaustion. They laughed together, cried together, shared memories, and created new ones. And through those moments, Jenny felt her identity returning, not as someone's partner, not as someone's sacrifice, but as her own person, strong, independent, and whole. She also rebuilt her relationship with her family. The people who had worried for her, prayed for her, and waited for her return. They held her, listened to her, supported her, and reminded her that she was never alone, that she was always loved, even when she was far away, even when she was lost, even when she was hurting. And through their love, she felt safe again. Safe to feel, safe to trust, safe to hope, safe to dream. She began to set new goals, not based on fear, not based on escape, but based on growth, fulfillment, and purpose. She wanted to build a life that reflected her values: honesty, respect, kindness, courage, and emotional safety. She wanted relationships that felt mutual, balanced, and transparent. She wanted work that felt meaningful, creative, and empowering. And she wanted a future that felt stable, not chaotic, peaceful. not confusing, and for the first time in a long time, she felt capable of building that future, not because someone else promised it, but because she trusted herself to create it. She returned to education, to learning, to expanding her mind and skills. She took classes, read books, attended workshops, and invested in her growth. Not because she felt behind, but because she felt motivated. She wanted to become the best version of herself, not to prove anything to anyone, but to honor herself. And with every step forward, she felt stronger, more confident, and more aligned with who she truly was. She also learned to forgive. Not because Sumit deserved forgiveness, but because she deserved peace. She learned that forgiveness is not forgetting, not excusing, not justifying, but releasing the anger, the resentment, the bitterness, and the emotional weight that keeps you tied to pain. She released him not from accountability, but from her heart. She released the story not from memory, but from power. And through that release, she freed herself from the emotional chains that betrayal creates. She no longer replayed conversations, no longer analyzed excuses, no longer searched for closure in unanswered questions, because she realized closure is not something someone gives you. It is something you create within yourself. And she created it through acceptance, understanding, and self-compassion. She also learned to trust again, not blindly, not immediately, but intentionally. She learned to observe actions, not just words, consistency, not just promises, respect, not just affection. She learned to set boundaries early, communicate clearly, and walk away when red flags appeared. Not because she was afraid, but because she was aware that her peace was valuable, her time was precious, and her heart deserved safety. She learned that love does not require suffering, and that chemistry without trust is chaos, and that connection without honesty is confusion. And through these lessons, she became wiser, not colder, more discerning, not distant, more aware, not afraid. She remained open, compassionate, and hopeful, but she no longer ignored reality in the name of love. She embraced reality as the foundation of love, and that shift changed everything. She no longer chased affection. She attracted respect. She no longer settled for attention. She demanded consistency. She no longer confused intensity with intimacy. She chose stability, and through these choices, she created a life that felt safe, grounded, and authentic. She also found joy in simple things: morning coffee, evening walks, quiet music, warm sunlight, shared laughter, meaningful conversations, and peaceful solitude. She learned that happiness does not always come from big moments. Sometimes it comes from small, quiet, ordinary moments that feel safe and real. And she learned to appreciate those moments, to savor them, to protect them, and to build her life around them. She learned that peace is not boring. Peace is powerful. Peace is healing. Peace is freedom. And she chose peace every day, not because life was perfect, but because she refused to return to chaos. She refused to return to confusion, and she refused to return to emotional harm. She chose herself consistently, intentionally, and unapologetically, and that choice became her strength, her foundation, and her future. And as time continued to pass, she found herself thinking about love again, not with fear, not with skepticism, but with curiosity. She wondered what love could feel like. When it was healthy, honest, and mutual, she wondered what it would feel like to be chosen without conditions, without secrecy, without excuses. She wondered what it would feel like to feel safe in someone's presence, safe in their words, safe in their actions. And those thoughts no longer triggered anxiety. They sparked hope, not hope rooted in fantasy, but hope rooted in reality. She knew that love was possible, not because someone promised it, but because she now understood what love truly was: respect, honesty, accountability, and emotional safety. And she knew she would never accept less again. She began dating slowly, cautiously, intentionally, not because she was lonely, but because she was curious about connection, curious about compatibility, curious about shared values. She met different people, had different conversations, experienced different energies, and through those experiences, she learned even more about herself, her preferences, her boundaries, her needs, and her desires. She learned what she liked, what she did not like, what she needed, and what she refused to tolerate. And that knowledge empowered her, not because it made her demanding, but because it made her clear. And clarity is kindness, clarity is honesty, and clarity is self-respect. She learned to walk away early when something did not align. Not because she feared conflict, but because she respected herself enough to not waste time in misalignment. She learned that staying in something that feels wrong is not patience, it is self-betrayal. And she refused to betray herself again. She learned that being alone is better than being in a relationship that feels lonely, and she embraced her solitude not as a punishment, but as a privilege, a space to reflect, to grow, to heal, and to thrive. She learned to enjoy her own company, to trust her own judgment, and to value her own presence. And through that, she built a strong relationship with herself, a relationship based on honesty, compassion, consistency, and respect. And that relationship became the most important one in her life because it determined how she showed up in every other relationship. And as she continued her journey, she felt proud of herself, not for surviving heartbreak, but for choosing healing, not for leaving a relationship, but for choosing self-worth, not for escaping pain, but for creating peace. She felt proud of the woman she had become, not because she was perfect, but because she was real, resilient, and self-aware. She felt proud of her courage, her honesty, her growth, and her ability to turn pain into wisdom. And that pride was not arrogance, it was self-respect. And self-respect became her compass, guiding her decisions, her boundaries, her relationships, and her future. And as she looked ahead, she no longer felt fear. She felt excitement, curiosity, and confidence. She knew challenges would come, but she also knew she had the strength, awareness, and resilience to face them. She knew she would never again abandon herself. And that promise became her greatest protection, her greatest gift, and her greatest freedom. That promise became her greatest protection, her greatest gift, and her greatest freedom. She began to live with intention instead of reaction. She chose her actions based on values instead of fear, and she built her life not around what she had lost, but around what she wanted to become. She developed daily habits that nurtured her mind, body, and spirit. She exercised not to change her body, but to strengthen it. She ate well not to control herself, but to care for herself. She rested not because she was tired, but because she respected her energy. She meditated not to escape her thoughts, but to understand them. And through these practices, she cultivated inner stability, emotional balance, and mental clarity. She learned that healing is not a destination. It is a daily choice, a series of small decisions that accumulate into a peaceful life. She learned that growth does not come from avoiding pain, but from processing it, understanding it, and transforming it into wisdom. She learned that strength is not loud, aggressive, or dominating. Strength is quiet, consistent, and rooted in self-respect. And as she embodied this strength, her presence changed, her energy changed, and the way people treated her changed. She noticed that she was no longer attracting chaos, confusion, or emotional instability. Instead, she attracted calm, honesty, and emotional maturity. Not because she demanded it, but because she embodied it. She became a mirror of the values she lived by. And people who did not align with those values naturally drifted away, while those who did align were drawn to her. And this shift brought her peace, not because she wanted approval, but because she valued alignment. She learned that compatibility is not just about attraction. It is about shared values, emotional availability, communication styles, and mutual respect. And once she understood that, she stopped trying to force connections. She stopped chasing people who were inconsistent, unavailable, or unclear, and she stopped investing in relationships that drained her. Instead, she invested in relationships that nourished her, supported her, and respected her. And those relationships became the foundation of her new life. She also learned the importance of self-expression. She allowed herself to speak openly, honestly, and authentically, not to impress, not to please, but to be real. She expressed her needs without guilt, her boundaries without fear, and her emotions without shame. And in doing so, she discovered that vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is courage. Vulnerability is honesty. Vulnerability is strength. And that strength created deeper connections, not with everyone, but with the right people. She learned that being understood is more important than being liked, and being respected is more important than being desired. And these priorities transformed her relationships. She no longer sought validation from others, she sought alignment, authenticity, and mutual understanding. And through that shift, she experienced a level of peace she had never known before. She also learned to celebrate her progress, not just her achievements, but her efforts, her consistency, and her growth. She celebrated small victories, setting boundaries, saying no, walking away, choosing rest, choosing honesty, choosing herself. And each celebration reinforced her self-worth, her confidence, and her resilience. She learned that progress is not always visible, but it is always meaningful. And that growth often happens quietly, slowly, and invisibly until one day you look back and realize you are no longer the same person. And that realization filled her with gratitude, pride, and peace. She also learned to redefine success, not as approval, status, or external validation, but as inner peace, emotional safety, meaningful relationships, and personal fulfillment. She realized that true success is not about having more, but about needing less, not about proving anything, but about living authentically, not about impressing others, but about honoring yourself. And this redefinition freed her from comparison, competition, and insecurity. She no longer measured her worth against others. She measured her life by how it felt, and how it felt became her most important metric. She wanted her life to feel safe, honest, meaningful, and peaceful, and she built her life around those feelings. She also learned to trust the process of life, not because everything would always work out perfectly, but because she trusted herself to handle whatever came. She trusted her ability to adapt, to learn, to grow, and to heal. And that trust created confidence, not the confidence of certainty, but the confidence of resilience. She knew that even if life brought challenges, losses, or disappointments, she would not break. She would bend, she would heal, and she would rise. And that knowledge gave her courage to take risks, try new things, and step outside her comfort zone. She traveled again, not to escape, but to explore. She met new cultures, new people, and new perspectives, and each experience expanded her understanding of the world and herself. She learned that the world is vast, diverse, and full of possibility, and that her life was not limited to one relationship, one place, or one story. She learned that endings are not failures, they are transitions, and transitions are opportunities for growth, change, and renewal. And this understanding allowed her to release the past without bitterness and embrace the future without fear. She also learned to honor her emotions, not suppress them, not judge them, but listen to them. She learned that emotions are signals, not enemies, and that when listened to, they guide you toward your needs, boundaries, and truth. She learned to sit with discomfort, uncertainty, and vulnerability, not to avoid them, but to understand them. And through this understanding, she gained emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and inner strength. She learned that emotional maturity is not about never feeling pain, but about knowing how to respond to pain in healthy ways. And she committed herself to responding with compassion, clarity, and self-respect. She also learned to let go of perfection. She no longer tried to be flawless, to please everyone, or to meet unrealistic standards. Instead, she embraced authenticity, growth, and progress. She allowed herself to make mistakes, learn from them, and move forward without shame, guilt, or self-punishment. And through this self-compassion, she created a kinder, gentler, and more supportive relationship with herself. And that relationship became the foundation of her confidence, resilience, and peace. She also learned to live in the present moment, not stuck in the past, not anxious about the future, but grounded in the now. She practiced mindfulness, gratitude, and awareness, noticing the beauty in ordinary moments, the warmth of sunlight, the sound of laughter, the comfort of silence, and the peace of stillness. She learned that life happens now, not yesterday, not tomorrow, but now. And by living in the present, she experienced life more fully, more deeply, and more meaningfully. She also learned to give without losing herself, to love without sacrificing herself, and to connect without abandoning herself. She learned that healthy relationships are built on interdependence, not dependence, and that true love supports individuality, not erases it. And with this understanding, she approached all relationships, romantic, familial, platonic, with balance, respect, and self-awareness. She no longer tried to fix people, save people, or carry people. Instead, she allowed people to take responsibility for their own lives, choices, and healing, and she focused on her own growth, happiness, and well-being. She learned that you cannot change others, but you can change your response to them, and that response determines your peace. And she chose responses that honored her, protected her, and empowered her. She also learned the power of saying no, not as rejection, but as self-respect. She learned that every no to what harms you is a yes to what honors you. And every boundary you set creates space for healthier connections. And she practiced this consistently, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it was misunderstood, even when it was lonely, because she valued her peace more than approval, and she valued her truth more than comfort. And through this practice, she strengthened her self-trust, self-respect, and self-confidence. She learned that self-trust is built through consistent self-honoring, and self-honoring is built through choices that align with your values, and she committed herself to making those choices every day. She also learned to release guilt, not because she had done nothing wrong, but because guilt often comes from prioritizing yourself in a world that benefits from your self-abandonment. She learned that choosing yourself is not selfish, it is necessary, and that taking care of yourself allows you to show up more fully.